Do-hoon, our filthy goblin, is currently undergoing a cardio training program with Lee So-hee, who is a team manager. She was disoriented and uncomfortable and said that they ought not to be doing such a thing in the office. But the training was in progress, and the situation was ironic. He had to train with a colleague, and as luck would have it, the colleague was the mother of the girl who had once ruined his life. The time is now here. It was time for revenge. Going back to a month ago, Do-hoon had been sitting at his desk in his office when a message notification appeared abruptly. It came through team leader Lee So-hee. He had also questioned her about why she was texting him and calling him. By the end of the previous day, Seok Do-hoon had 1 year of full-time experience in the company. In his head, he had considered how it was such a pain that the office of the team leader was so distant. He recalled the time back in his life when he had left high school because of social anxiety. However, he had overcome it and passed her GED exam. He eventually graduated from an institution ranked among the top universities in the country, despite entering late compared to his counterparts. Nevertheless, despite the lag, he had already got employment, an achievement in itself. On his way to the office of the team leader, it came to him that the whole year had passed, showing how unbelievable it was that he had already worked there a year long. Presently, now that he was in his office, he was standing in front of a door, considering that, should anyone question him on whether something extraordinary had occurred in his life, despite his leading a busy and routine life, he would definitely have stated that it pertained to the team leader. He knocked and heard her voice within, bidding him enter, and walking into the office, he saw her sitting comfortably and seemingly in a very pleasant humor, asked him to come inside. He inquired whether she had called him. The team leader, Lee So-hee, was described as a great person who was successful at a tender age. She was so greatly regarded throughout the company due to her desirable qualities and her remarkable skills. She was great in almost all the areas of her work. She noticed Do-hoon in a deep thought and broke his thought by making a teasing comment, asking why Do-hoon was daydreaming. Then, seeing something, she remarked on the smell of alcohol that still smelled around him and questioned him whether he had been out drinking with his workmen last night. Shamed by this, he acknowledged that she was right. She laughed and admitted her correct conjecture. Do-hoon could not but be struck by the fact that her actions seemed to go against her words quite often, as her beautiful and mature appearance, even though spoken with an authoritative tone, created the opposite impression. She proceeded to say that she had invited him in partly to congratulate him that he was 1 year in the company, just like he had done with his team. According to her, she wanted to work with him on a new project, and that manager Da-som had suggested the project. She added that she was looking forward to working with him. She nonchalantly put a little bottle of alcohol in his pocket and informed him to consume it to calm his alcohol levels, and that she would meet him in meeting room B. Glancing at the bottle, he responded with a nod and guaranteed her that he was going to do his best. The time passed by, and the tiresome chores too. Later that evening, she questioned him on the way how he had discovered their initial encounter together. He responded that he had sat there and mostly listened to the others. She explained to him that it was forgivable, bearing in mind that this was his first engagement in such a meeting. Then she told him that on the following day, they would not be able to do away with night shifts any longer. He was taken aback, so he requested confirmation, and deep inside his mind, he was imagining how the two of them together, working the night shifts, was not that bad. Indeed, all the men in the firm, including him, had a silent desire of having to work at night with the tempting team leader. At this point, however, it was only a dream. There came the elevator, and they both climbed into it. When the doors opened, again, she inquired whether he was going home. He confirmed he was, then inquired whether she was heading to the station. Internally, he reflected on how no one had ever dared flirt with the team leader. After all, she was a company executive and a married woman at that. She explained that she wasn't going home just yet because her daughter had come to pick her up. When the elevator reached the second floor, she turned to him and asked what he thought about the company after having worked there for a year. Flustered, he apologized and admitted he wasn't entirely sure. By the time they reached the basement level, she opened up, admitting that she had initially been concerned when he joined the company. But over time, he had proven himself both socially and professionally, and she told him she expected good things from him going forward. He responded respectfully, acknowledging her encouragement. She then bid him farewell, wishing him a safe journey home. He responded with similar words, thanking her and saying goodbye. As he walked away, he found himself deep in thought. Despite her being a married woman, he couldn't help but feel drawn to her. She was incredibly attractive, but the risks were far too great. To him, she resembled a forbidden fruit hanging precariously from the edge of a cliff. And yet, despite knowing better, he had wanted to have dinner with her. While lost in those thoughts, a young woman passed by him. He glanced at her, wondering if she was a visitor. She stood there, looking awkward, and he found himself wondering if she might be the team leader's daughter. Moving closer, he addressed her gently, telling her she seemed lost. But as she turned around to face him, his entire body stiffened in shock. It was Han So-mi. He couldn't believe it. Staring at her in disbelief, a rush of terrible memories flooded back. She was the very same bully from his high school days, the one who had harassed him relentlessly. She had been the reason he had dropped out of school and had developed the social anxiety that still plagued him. He recalled a particularly humiliating incident in which she had poured milk on the floor and ordered him to lick it. Snapping back to the present, rage welled up inside him. Just then, Lee So-hee walked over to the young woman and asked affectionately whether she had been waiting long. The girl, her daughter, responded with mild irritation, questioning why her mother had taken so long. She hugged her tightly. Lee So-hee explained that she had thought her daughter was waiting in the parking lot and asked if she hadn't mentioned having plans that day. Han So-mi replied that she had canceled those plans to have dinner with her mother, insisting that her mother was more important. Hidden behind a nearby wall, Do-hoon observed the interaction with wide eyes, stunned beyond words. The truth crashed down on him in waves that Han So-mi, the person who had ruined his youth, was Lee So-hee's daughter. Do-hoon stood frozen in place, his thoughts a chaotic whirlwind. He kept telling himself that he had moved on, that he had buried the pain of the past deep within and had let go of everything related to her. But now, faced with her unexpected return, everything resurfaced. He did not get the reason that all of the time, she does not have to appear in front of him like that. The name he had worked so hard to forget came rushing back. Han So-mi. The overwhelming emotions boiled into a single word that echoed inside his head. That was revenge. Revenge was only the thing he needed. That was the only way to ease the storm inside him. He clenched his fists, shaking slightly, and forced himself to think clearly. If she had caused him to lose something precious, he would repay the favor in kind. She needed to lose something, someone equally valuable. That was the only way to balance the scales. His gaze turned cold as he thought that the person most important to her must be her mother. The following evening, team leader Lee So-hee was working late during her night shift in the office. She sighed quietly to herself, trying to muster some energy. She muttered that she couldn't afford to feel tired already, especially not when the shift had just started. She reminisced briefly about her younger days, back when she didn't even need supplements to keep going. Youth truly was a gift, she mused. A small smile tugged at her lips as she wondered how Do-hoon was doing at that moment. Just then, Do-hoon entered her office, carrying a calm and polite expression. He approached her and mentioned that he was planning to make some coffee and asked if she would like a cup as well. Gratefully, she agreed and told him that sounded wonderful. He made his way into the office kitchen and began preparing the coffee, casually asking her preference hot or cold, or whether she would like some ice added. She responded that she'd like it iced. As he busied himself with preparing the drinks, his mind was far from peaceful. Behind his calm expression, there was a different resolve brewing. Handing her the cup, he asked with a teasing smile whether she wasn't staring at him a little too much. Then, in a quiet and reflective inner voice, he acknowledged what he was about to do. He had already decided to throw himself off the metaphorical cliff, to dive headfirst into the madness of his plan. And although he knew it was reckless, even foolish, he had finally found a reason to go through with it. Lee So-hee responded playfully, saying that she had simply been wondering about something. She pointed out that he seemed to be working out quite a lot lately. Perhaps it was because he was still young, but his muscles looked particularly well-toned. Then, tilting her head with mild curiosity, she asked aloud whether they were hard. Her words sent a chill of strange excitement down his spine. This, he thought, was his reason, the justification for everything. He looked at her and offered with a soft grin that if she wanted, she could touch them. After all, they were alone in the office, and he didn't mind. But beneath his polite demeanor and flirtatious tone, his mind remained sharp and calculating. This was all part of the plan. He wasn't just flirting for the sake of attraction, he was preparing a stage. He was going to gaslight Han So-mi's mother, to pull her into an emotional snare. This would be his way of making Han So-mi pay for what she had done to him. He told himself that he would make sure to deliver the best present that So-mi had ever received, and it would come in the form of her mother's heartbreak. When he had made such a bold remark about letting her touch his muscles, Lee So-hee had looked at him with a slight suggestion of bewilderment. She wanted to know what he meant and asked him to cease meddling. Yet to laugh, she gave her voice a nervous advantage. She was hesitant with her body language, but there was an aspect of her that could not resist the desire to know. She smiled clumsily and excused herself and reached out slowly. Her fingers touched his arm, and she said a small gasp. His mold was hard to her touch, his veins were showing under the skin, and his body was unnaturally warm. But a moment she lingered, her hand. At the back of her mind, she was wondering when it was that she last touched the body of the man, even in that little way. But the idea startled her, and self-awareness was about to hit. Still with his rational composure, Do-hoon inquired of her, with a mocking smile, whether it was good. She responded with a partially teasing statement, which implied that he had to be a hit among women. He laughed and said that he had wasted a lot of time exercising because he had spent a long time back home. In the meantime, her mind was starting to get out of control. She did not realize the reason her heart beat so thrust against the chest, she asked herself, and she chastised herself inside, bidding herself calm down. Do-hoon felt she was not as energetic, so she decided to refocus the moment. He recommended that they go back to work. However, she suddenly spilled coffee on his shirt as they were about to take a step. He peeped and saw the spreading stain and how wet the fabric was. She held her breath and, as soon as possible, gave him her handkerchief, saying she was sorry and inquiring whether he was all right. Without hesitation, she stepped forward and began wiping his shirt, gently blotting the fabric. She assured him she would take care of it. Do-hoon remained silent as he watched her. Behind his composed face, his mind was sharp and calculating. He wasn't just thinking about the coffee. He was watching her reaction, her proximity, the gentle way she tried to clean up after the accident. To him, this was only a piece of the larger puzzle. In his heart, he had already made up his mind. She would become the reason he would walk straight off the cliff into revenge, into something irreversible. Elsewhere in the city, Hansomi was behind the counter at the cafe, working as the barista. She passed coffee to a pair of male customers, smiling brightly. The young men, clearly smitten, whispered to one another about how beautiful she looked. Her cheerful smile and effortless charm had long been the talk of regulars. As she handed over the drinks, she encouraged them to enjoy themselves. The two boys continued whispering, saying she had always been popular, especially when she smiled like that. But just then, Do-hoon stepped forward, appearing out of nowhere. His expression was serious, and without hesitation, he told her that she owed him an apology. She looked up, taken aback, and asked why she should be the one to apologize. According to her, it had been his fault for being such an easy target back then. Her tone was casual, dismissive, as if she didn't even remember what she had done. Do-hoon stood in place, boiling inside. He did not get the reason she was acting as if nothing had happened, as if the years of torment she had caused didn't matter to her. Inwardly, his anger screamed. She was living a normal life, untouched, unbothered, like she hadn't pushed him to the edge. He thought bitterly about the countless nights he'd spent in darkness, fighting back the urge to end it all. The emotional wounds still hadn't healed. For years, he had tried to forget her, and now here she was again, smiling in public, surrounded by admiration, while he carried scars from her cruelty. It wasn't fair, and, in his heart, he blamed her entirely. Later that evening, back in the office, the night shift had begun. It was the final day of the project. Do-hoon sat in silence, staring at the dim lighting, his thoughts drifting to darker intentions. He told himself that this was the night he would act. After all the waiting, after the preparation, this was his chance. The project was nearly over, and soon there would be no further excuse to see her every day. He glanced at Lee So-hee across the room and thought about how they had worked closely over the past week. She mentioned they still had overtime to finish, and he nodded, pretending to stay focused. She began searching through folders and files, muttering to herself that she couldn't find the printed copy of her presentation. Do-hoon watched her quietly, reflecting on the life he had tried to rebuild. He had once longed for normalcy, craved peace, but now all he could think about was vengeance. In a sudden motion, he flipped the switch on the wall and turned off the lights. The office went dark. Casually, he announced that the lights must have gone out, but his intentions were far from innocent. He looked over at the cupboard and pointed, telling her that the printouts might be over there. Inside, he was already weighing the risk. He was thinking as if he was truly willing to gamble everything for a chance at revenge. He moved closer to her, thinking back over the week they'd spent together. One thing had become obvious to him, that the team leader, for all her strength and poise, was unexpectedly vulnerable to physical closeness from men. He began closing the distance between them. So he stepped back slightly, clearly uncomfortable, and told him he was standing too close. But Do-hoon ignored the warning. With firm resolve, he addressed her, saying that before he could train her properly, he first had to make her his. She froze, completely stunned, asking what he meant. His tone didn't waver as he replied that he couldn't go back now. Confused and alarmed, she asked him again what he was doing. He told her that he had waited a long time for this moment. He insisted that she had waited too, that every time they had touched while working, she had secretly expected more. She quickly denied it, telling him he was mistaken. Still, he reached out and gently touched her hand. When she flinched, he used that reaction to prove his point. He noted that even a slight touch could make her react so visibly. She scolded him, telling him to stop joking around. But he continued. He told her that he would help her understand not just the satisfaction of being a career woman, but the joys of being someone who embraced emotional and physical connection. She was growing visibly upset now. Her voice sharpened as she told him it wasn't right to conduct any kind of workout session in the office, especially not like that. Her eyes narrowed in disapproval, and she made it clear that the boundaries he was trying to cross were unacceptable. This was also what he had said. He needed to train her in wrestling so she could have what he had described as the actual enjoyment of being a woman. So, saying this, he burst into laughter, evidently amused at what he said. After which, he proceeded to tell her she was right about something she had said before, but he did not tell her what that was. He further claimed that he had seen her always looking away whenever they interacted, which meant that she was hiding something. He informed her that he had noticed it was weird the way she had been giving him this special attention, as though there was some sort of a game being played a little deeper than that. She looked at him in a confused way and told him what exactly he was talking about. There was a tone that she was not honking when she did that, but it was a true sign that she was disturbed with what he was saying. He replied that he did not miss the situation on this, that it was a pity, at least to him, especially since she is the team leader, and she is quite young, and with her gorgeous figure, he has admitted that he just could not help but get excited whenever they were working out together. She said she needed to leave immediately. Declaring that she would go first, she told him he should clean up and leave afterward. She made her way toward the door, but before she could reach it, he asked her if she was really going to leave like that. He then walked over and shut the door, telling her bluntly that he hadn't said she could leave, yet they still had unfinished office work to complete. Inside, his thoughts were jumbled, his head a complete mess. He didn't seem to know exactly what he was doing, yet he pressed on. She turned back toward him and told him to stop joking around with her, but he insisted that he was serious. He said he had known it all along, that he had been holding back his feelings for a long time, trying not to let them show. She looked at him again and asked, more insistently this time, what he was talking about. His response was unsettling. He said that he had felt this way before, and that even though she was a bit clumsy as a team leader, it was okay to be honest about one's feelings. Otherwise, it would make no sense for someone with such a stunning body to act as though she were completely unaware of the effect she had on others. She told him it had to stop, that he had taken it too far, but he ignored the warning. He said that in many ways, it was her fault that he had been exposed to such tempting views on a regular basis. She looked at him, alarmed, and asked again what he was talking about. Then, trying to defuse the moment, she told him to just go home and take care of whatever personal issues he had. She reminded him that he still had tasks to finish and should complete his work. He brushed off her suggestion, saying that it was okay. But then he asked what she meant by going home. He was thinking to himself that, at this point, he had done it. He had succeeded in trapping her in this awkward and charged moment. He changed the subject and asked her why she was staring so intently at him. He grabbed her hand and told her there was no need to act that way. It was okay to touch him if she wanted to. As all of this played out, he was silently reflecting that the revenge he had been planning was beginning to consume him. It felt like it was going to burn him alive. Then, breaking the silence, he addressed her as team leader. When she asked what he meant by that, he reassured her again, telling her that everything was okay. But in his thoughts, he was justifying it all, saying to himself that since she was his colleague and they were supposed to train together, the workout session was something he needed to go through with at least once. She responded by clarifying that they would only do the cardio session one time, and then they would both go home. He agreed, saying, of course, though in his mind, he had already decided that there was no going back. He didn't care anymore, as he had always wanted to go through this workout session with her, and now it was finally happening. Both of them started performing workout sessions together. He began to recall a particular day when the team leader had been praising all the colleagues in the office. She had been smiling warmly and expressing her appreciation, saying that everyone had done a great job that quarter. She noted that the planning team had once again been the best performer and thanked everyone sincerely for their continued hard work. 2 team members were standing in front of her at the time. One of them had told manager Lee So-hee that she was always right and that they were all indebted to her. The other added that their achievements wouldn't have been possible without her leadership. Meanwhile, another girl who had been standing beside Do-hoon at the time had been quietly observing. She had thought to herself that So-hee, who smiled more than anyone and was loved by everyone, was truly an ideal boss. She admired how So-hee managed her work so efficiently, all while being graceful and beautiful. She wasn't someone anyone could dismiss or take lightly. Later, So-hee walked over to Do-hoon and addressed him directly. She had reminded him that it would soon be a full year since he had joined the company, encouraging him to continue working hard in the future. She thanked him in advance for his dedication, then gently pointed out that his necktie had come a bit loose. In that moment, Do-hoon had been filled with admiration, thinking to himself that manager Lee So-hee was the most respected person in the entire company. He had also started imagining himself doing a cardio session with her. In his mind, he was thinking that this was a huge success for him, that he had accomplished something he had never expected. He was basking in the moment, convinced that no one else could replace what he had just experienced. But suddenly, the atmosphere shifted. He noticed someone entering the office unexpectedly. It was the night security guard, holding a flashlight in his hand. The guard's voice echoed in the dark, asking what kind of sound had been coming from that area. He mentioned that the lights were off and called out to see if anyone was still inside the office. The night shift was taking its toll on the guard, who moved through the dimly lit office, exhausted and muttering to himself that working part-time as a guard was more difficult than he had imagined. He wondered if this was the last room he needed to check. Just as he was about to leave, he suddenly noticed a faint noise coming from the far corner of the office. He froze, startled, and questioned inwardly what that sound could have been. Hesitant but alert, he moved cautiously toward the meeting room. Standing at the entrance, he debated whether he should go inside, asking aloud if anyone was there. As he stood in the silence, unsure of his next move, his phone began to ring, snapping him out of his thoughts. He murmured that a call was coming in, and quickly answered. Her instincts told her someone was still nearby. She quietly stated that someone was definitely outside, and that if they came in, they'd be caught for sure. Outside, the guard, still distracted by the call, responded to the voice on the other end. They had asked how things were going, and he replied by asking if there was any issue on their side. Then, he added that he was just checking the building and suspected someone might still be inside. Unsure, he asked what he should do next. As the guard's flashlight passed through the hallway, its beam triggered a chain of memories in Do-hoon's mind. His thoughts drifted involuntarily to his painful school days haunted by the bullying he endured from Somi. One vivid memory surfaced that he had been sitting quietly in his classroom when Han Somi had suddenly approached him. Back then, he had gone by the name Lee Sung-min. Han Somi had leaned toward him and, with a falsely sweet voice, had told him she missed him. Shocked and terrified to see her, he had asked what she was doing there. She had been hiding a piece of paper behind her back and asked playfully if he hadn't received a love letter. Confused, he questioned what letter she meant. She then claimed that the letter was from him. With a cruel smile, she told him she had been waiting for him ever since she noticed the way he had restlessly stared at her. Without warning, she had grabbed him by the collar and accused him of being a criminal trying to hurt a delicate woman. Then, laughing coldly, she mentioned something about a 10,000 won prank. Before he could even respond, she shoved him violently to the floor and broke into loud laughter, calling out to the rest of the class. She had shouted that she had told everyone Lee Sung-min would fall for the trick, mocking him and calling him a loser who had fallen for a fake confession. That moment had stayed with Do-hoon like a scar etched into his soul. He had remembered thinking that she was the one who had made him feel so hopeless, the one who had driven him to the edge of suicide. Even now, the pain echoed in his heart. He recalled how she and her group had locked him inside a classroom, laughing as they did it. They had joked about leaving him there until he starved. At the time, he had convinced himself that the nightmare was finally over, that the trauma had faded, but clearly, it hadn't. Snapping back to the present, the voice on the other end of the phone instructed the guard to return quickly after his rotation, as someone else would be covering the night shift. The guard assured them he'd be back soon, then exited the office with a grumble, muttering that he truly hated this job. Once the coast was clear, Do-hoon and So-hee emerged from hiding, gasping quietly as they caught their breath. So-hee, still tense, remarked that they had survived the scare, but Do-hoon wasn't fully present. His thoughts lingered on his earlier flashback. He questioned whether he had just seriously considered giving up. So-hee, still shaken, confessed that she no longer wanted to continue playing this twisted game. Do-hoon admitted he had also thought about quitting just moments ago, but now, something had changed inside him. So-hee looked at him, confused and unsure. Meanwhile, Do-hoon silently resolved that no matter what happened, he would have his revenge. He reminded himself that she, Lee So-hee, was Han Somi's mother, the same Somi who had made his life a living hell. There was no way he was letting it go now. Both of them agreed to move forward with the next session of the cardio training. Inwardly, he was reeling. The situation felt surreal to him, almost too strange to be real. He kept thinking that the manager who was admired, even idolized, by all the employees was now doing an intense cardio session alone with him in a private, quiet space. The realization was making him feel dizzy. His thoughts raced as he struggled to contain his excitement. Things were progressing faster than he had ever planned, and his strategy was working out better than he could have imagined. On the other side of the city, Han Somi had been trying again and again to call her mother, her fingers moving restlessly across her phone screen. Anxiety slowly crept in as her calls went unanswered. She couldn't help but wonder what was happening. She was thinking maybe her mother was working late again. She had sent several messages too, asking if her mom had finished work, questioning what was taking so long, but there had been no response. The silence made her increasingly uneasy, a quiet tension settling in her chest. As her own shift neared its end, she came to a decision. It seemed she would have to go pick her mother up herself so they could return home together. Before she could leave, however, one of her coworkers approached her with a casual smile and asked if she had a moment to help clean up the store. The colleague even suggested they grab a late-night snack while cleaning. But Somi politely declined without hesitation, explaining that she had something she needed to take care of after her shift. With that, She left the cafe without looking back. While walking through the quiet streets, her mind drifted again. A part of her couldn't help but feel irritated with herself. She was constantly worrying over the smallest, most meaningless things. She had once imagined that growing up would bring clarity and excitement, that growing up would be different better, but the truth had turned out to be far from her expectations. Life as a grown woman now felt far more monotonous and emotionally dull than her carefree days as a student. As she stood waiting at a streetlight, she pulled out her phone and stared at a photo of herself and her mother, one of their happier moments. The image stirred something soft inside her. She sighed and thought that her life was supposed to be peaceful by now. Quietly, dialed her mother's number again. Her voice was gentle this time as she left a message, asking if her mother was still working and telling her how much she missed her. Her thoughts grew reflective. Everyone, she mused, had their own unique definition of happiness. Some chased wealth, others success. But for her, happiness was something much simpler. Living a quiet, ordinary life with her mother, that was her version of happiness. That was all she had ever wanted. She reached the building and entered the elevator, pressing the button for the 16th floor. As she ascended, her mind whispered a quiet wish to leave peacefully, without any more complications, without getting caught in messes that didn't concern her. She told herself silently that they should live a peaceful life now, without being pulled into unnecessary chaos. The elevator dinged, signaling its arrival. The doors slid open slowly, and there, standing directly in front of her, was her mother. So her breath caught for a moment. Her eyes flickered toward her mother's hand. It looked odd, perhaps tense, and then shifted to the man standing beside her. It was Do-hoon. Somi looked at her mother with a questioning expression and immediately asked whether she was finished with work. Then, more sharply, she asked what had happened to her hand and who the man beside her was. Do-hoon turned toward Sohee and, with slight surprise, asked if this girl was her daughter. Then he turned to Somi directly. His tone was calm and polite as he told her that he had heard quite a bit about her and had been looking forward to meeting her someday. As he looked into her eyes, something inside him stirred. It had been so long since they had seen each other face to face like this. He hadn't expected this meeting, hadn't even thought it possible anymore. But now, as fate would have it, here they were. He stared at her quietly for a moment, then thought to himself that, despite everything that had happened, it was truly a strange pleasure to meet Hansomi once again. So he had glanced at her mother with a skeptical expression, her voice laced with disbelief as she asked whether the tall young man in front of them was the same loser her mother had mentioned in the past. The one who, according to her, had done nothing but grow taller. In response, Hansomi had studied the young man carefully before nodding. She had affirmed with certainty that he was indeed from their class, though she appeared slightly taken aback herself. She questioned aloud what was going on with him and then repeated, almost as if to convince herself, that there was no mistaking it, he had to be Lee Sung-min from those earlier days. She muttered that it had to be him. There was no way she was wrong, but still questioned whether she could trust her own recognition. Determined to resolve her doubts, she moved forward slightly and called out to him, asking if he was really Lee Sung-min. But the young man didn't stop. Without making eye contact, he simply passed by the two women and said he will be heading in first before walking toward the exit. As he reached the door, he paused for a moment and spoke over his shoulder, correcting them with composure. He told them his name was Seok Do-hoon, not Lee Sung-min, and asked that they please remember that for the next time. Although he didn't turn to look at them directly, his eyes briefly flicked in Hansomi's direction, and a quiet fire seemed to flicker behind them. In his thoughts, a firm promise formed he would come after her soon. There was a resolve in him that refused to be ignored. The following day, Sohee sat alone in her office, her thoughts tangled in a mix of embarrassment. Her fingers nervously tapped against her desk, and her gaze remained fixed on the empty space in front of her. The memory of what had happened still clung to her like a shadow. She kept replaying the events in her mind, convinced that she must have gone mad. Regardless of how good the atmosphere had initially been, it had all been swept away by one reckless moment, allowing an employee to engage in a workout session right there on office grounds. The very idea felt absurd, unprofessional. It wasn't just embarrassment, that it was something more visceral, as though her instincts were trying to warn her. While she continued to overanalyze everything, the door opened without warning, and Do-hoon stepped inside, his tone bright and casual as he greeted her with a polite morning greeting. She glanced up, managing to respond with a quiet morning greeting, though her voice lacked warmth. He observed her pale complexion for a moment before stepping closer. Internally, he admitted to himself that his visit wasn't just for official matters. He had come to see how she was holding up after what had happened. When she asked what he needed this time, he replied that he had come to deliver a report, but inwardly, his mind was drawn to the strange thrill he felt just being near her. It was unfamiliar, yet oddly exciting. After a beat, he leaned forward slightly and remarked that she didn't look well, teasing that a grown woman like her should know better than to neglect her own health. Without waiting for her response, He stepped behind her and gently began massaging her shoulders. Startled, Sohee stiffened under his touch. She looked uneasy, her body betraying her hesitation. Still, she didn't stop him right away. He commented on how tense her muscles were, claiming she needed to relax. She quickly responded that it wasn't necessary and tried to wave him off. Yet despite her protests, a quiet storm was stirring inside her. She couldn't understand it every time he touched her. Something strange spread through her body. It wasn't exactly fear, but it wasn't comforting either. Do-hoon, picking up on her shallow breathing, asked again if she was okay. He reminded her that she had reacted the same way previously and, with a teasing grin, suggested they do another cardio session like before. Her eyes widened, and she quickly told him to stop, but he continued pushing playfully, commenting that it seemed like her body was already responding. She shook her head, flustered, and insisted that it wasn't like that. Just then, the door opened again, and another employee entered the room. She stopped mid-sentence as she took in the scene her manager seated, visibly tense, with Do-hoon standing far too close behind her. She asked awkwardly if Sohee was busy with Mr. Do-hoon. Snapping back into her professional demeanor, Sohee addressed the employee swiftly, asking if she had come for certain documents. When the employee nodded, Sohee assured her she would handle them and politely asked her to leave. The woman nodded again, this time more hesitantly, and exited the room without saying another word. As the door closed, Sohee turned sharply toward Do-hoon, whispering with urgency that they had almost been caught. She asked him if he had completely lost his senses and demanded to know what exactly he thought he was doing. She warned that this was dangerous, both professionally and personally. Do-hoon, however, only smiled slightly and asked if she had any plans after work. He proposed that they go out for drinks. Beneath his casual tone was a more calculated intention. He thought to himself that he couldn't afford to let her distance herself from him. That was why he had made the suggestion he needed her to stay close, to keep her within reach. That evening, the marketing team gathered at a lively bar, laughter and chatter echoing through the room. Sohee raised her glass in a toast and cheered with a smile to Marketing Team 1. Everyone clinked their glasses together, enjoying the moment. Do-hoon sat a short distance away, quietly watching her. He couldn't help but feel annoyed. This wasn't what he had envisioned for the evening. His mind drifted back to earlier, when Sohee had announced to the entire team that it had been a while since their last team dinner and suggested they all go out together. He had never imagined she would turn their private invitation into a group event. Leaning closer, he reminded her that he hadn't meant it to be a team dinner. She asked him what was wrong with that, feigning innocence. He realized then that perhaps he had underestimated her cautious nature. When he confessed that he had wanted the evening to be just for the two of them, she had chuckled and replied that drinking together alone would only get her into trouble. He glanced around the bar, realizing that she had made a calculated move. She had purposely brought others along to avoid being alone with him. It was smart, clever, even. He thought to himself that anything beyond friendly conversation in public would be risky now. It was clear she had become more alert to his intentions. Seated beside her, he accidentally brushed against her hand. He quickly apologized, saying he hadn't meant to do that. She looked at him and said it was fine. It wasn't like he had grabbed her or done anything inappropriate. It was just a touch. She asked if it hadn't been on purpose. Her calm, collected reaction left him confused. Something about the way she handled it made him feel like he had lost the upper hand. Then, in an effort to break the tension, he suggested they step outside for some fresh air. She agreed, and the two of them quietly slipped out of the crowded bar. As they stood in the night air, surrounded by quiet streets and flickering neon signs, Do-hoon felt a surge of relief. Finally, they were alone. He turned to her and asked how she was feeling, subtly hinting at the idea that this moment, just the two of them, might have been what she truly wanted. But Sohee didn't smile. She looked hesitant, conflicted, and then told him, in a firm but quiet voice, that they shouldn't be involved in this way. She explained that things could become far too complicated if they crossed that line. Do-hoon listened but refused to back away. In his mind, things were already complicated, and he believed she wouldn't be able to escape that reality. Her resistance only fueled his determination. Smirking slightly, he leaned in just enough and suggested a wager. If she won, he promised to never touch her again, never bring up workouts or games, and to keep his distance. But the glint in his eyes told another story, one that hinted he had no intention of losing. So he had asked him in disbelief if he was truly telling the truth. In response, he had assured her sincerely, addressing her as Madam, and had promised that if she managed to keep her composure, no matter what he did from that point onward, he would give up on pursuing her. He had emphasized that he never wished to force her into anything she found uncomfortable or disliked. However, Sohee had looked at him with a puzzled expression and questioned what exactly he was trying to imply. She wanted confirmation of his promise. He had leaned toward her slightly and reaffirmed with certainty that he was indeed serious. In her mind, Sohee was beginning to panic. She realized she was in trouble. He seemed about to touch her headlights. Meanwhile, he had teasingly remarked that it looked like she was preparing herself for a wrestling match. Flustered, Sohee had immediately denied it. She reminded him that earlier she had drunk quite a bit and wasn't in a proper state for this kind of situation. He had responded with curiosity, asking if that was really the case and wondering aloud why he shouldn't be allowed to touch her. She grew more frustrated and asked why he couldn't just understand her boundaries. Then, as her thoughts spiraled, she feared that if things continued in this direction, she might end up going through that intense cardio session once again. She quietly murmured an apology to Mr. Do-hoon before she began stepping away. Confused, he had asked her where she was going, calling her madam, and then caught hold of her arm. With a playful tone, he reminded her that the bet between them was still on. She turned around and asked what he was doing, clearly unsettled. He reiterated firmly that it was a bet and admitted that he wanted to see it one more time, adding that he might have drunk too much as well. His head was spinning. Suddenly, a voice was heard coming from the area behind the building. Some people were asking for cigarettes. It turned out they were employees from the same company. Hearing them, Sohee had whispered nervously that there were people nearby. Meanwhile, the employees had begun chatting among themselves. One of them, in a hushed voice, remarked that the manager and Do-hoon had been acting quite strangely lately. Another agreed, saying it was suspicious how they were always seen together, though someone else chimed in and suggested that perhaps it was because of the ongoing project. Still, the first one insisted that Miss Dason was probably right in her assumptions. Yet another employee pointed out that the two had even left earlier together, while they themselves were still with their own colleagues. That employee mentioned they might leave soon, or maybe not. Someone else shrugged and admitted that they weren't sure what was really going on. Sohee had overheard the entire conversation and was alarmed. She recognized the voices. They belonged to her own team members. Do-hoon, trying to keep things calm, had whispered to her that she should ignore them, but she had grown more anxious and said that they would surely get caught. Do-hoon, however, had dismissed her worries, saying that even if they were seen, it wouldn't be a big deal. Sohee, clearly agitated, shouted at him and accused him of being a liar. He had laughed and told her to stop worrying so much. Meanwhile, one of the employees, Miss Dason, had begun walking toward the side of the building, saying that she thought she had heard some voices coming from that area. She walked around and called out to see if anyone was there. As she reached the corner, she saw Do-hoon standing there. He quickly tried to play it off by saying that he was just planning to head back inside and chuckled lightly. Suspicious, Dason asked him directly if it had been him making the noise, and then inquired about the whereabouts of the manager. Do-hoon replied smoothly, saying that the manager had suddenly felt unwell, so she had called a taxi and gone inside to cool off. But in truth, Sohee hadn't gone anywhere. She was hiding behind a large dustbin drum, crouching down and trying to stay completely still. Back near the doorway, Dason commented aloud that since the manager's belongings were still inside, she would go back in to fetch them. Sohee, still concealed, was fuming silently. She thought to herself that she was the manager, yet an employee like Do-hoon had ended up embarrassing her and treating her as if she were someone else entirely. The whole situation was beginning to deeply irritate her. Do-hoon had stopped the taxi for Sohee and pointed out that her ride had arrived. Without hesitation, he had informed her that he intended to accompany her, and without waiting for a response, he got into the taxi with her. He smiled and reminded her that he was simply a caring subordinate, just doing his duty. Trying to lighten the mood, he even offered to put on the workout session during the ride. Noticing the tension, the taxi driver glanced back and asked Sohee if everything was all right. She quickly reassured him that she was fine. Meanwhile, Do-hoon began to reflect, wondering if perhaps he had gotten a little too carried away. Eventually, they reached their destination. As the taxi stopped outside Sohee's house, her daughter, Han So-mi, was already standing near the entrance. She immediately noticed her mother's arrival and asked why she had returned so late when she had mentioned having a team dinner. Do-hoon followed Sohee to the doorstep and saw So-mi standing there. The moment he recognized her, a thought crossed his mind: she's here right now. Trying to stay composed, he greeted her politely, saying hello and calling her Miss Manager's daughter, and added with a light laugh that her mother was quite drunk. Internally, he was already planning to make his exit before the situation got too complicated. He told them that he'd be taking his leave now. However, So-mi called out to him, asking him to wait. Since it was his first time visiting, she invited him inside for a while. Do-hoon accepted the invitation and entered the apartment, taking a seat on the sofa. While he settled in, So-mi quietly observed him. She couldn't shake the feeling that he looked familiar. She wondered to herself if he is Lee Sung-min from high school. Curiosity got the better of her, and she asked about his age and whether he had ever lived in the area. Do-hoon responded with a casual laugh. Sohee, overhearing the conversation, interrupted and told So-mi to stop. She reminded her daughter that they didn't have anything at home to serve their guest, and that even Ah-young wasn't around. She asked Somi if she could quickly go to the nearby mart and buy something. Somi looked surprised and asked if she had to go right then. She also questioned why Ah-young wasn't home yet, but eventually, she agreed, though she couldn't help but point out that she was the one who had invited Do-hoon in the first place. So he nodded and told her she'd go wash up while Somi was out, urging her to return quickly. Somi protested, saying it was strange to leave a guest alone like that, but Sohee simply explained that she was feeling grimy from all the alcohol and her body felt sticky and smelly. She said she had to clean herself up. Do-hoon, smiling warmly, told her not to worry and reassured her that he would be fine. He also told Somi to take her time and not to rush. Somi then left for the mart. On her way, she was deep in thought. Something about Do-hoon seemed too familiar. She couldn't help but wonder if he is really someone else. In her distraction, she lightly kicked an empty soda can lying on the sidewalk. Back at the apartment, Sohee was finally enjoying a hot shower. She thought to herself how grateful she was for the opportunity to wash up in peace. Still, her mind wandered to Somi and the strange ideas she might be entertaining after seeing her and Do-hoon together. The thought embarrassed her. She couldn't believe such misunderstanding might arise, and all because of a subordinate like Do-hoon. Unexpectedly, Do-hoon had also entered the bathroom, joining her there. He was thinking to himself that he had almost given up on trying anything today. But with nobody else at home, it seemed the perfect chance to carry on their cardio session ironically, thanks to Han Somi's well-meaning actions. Sohee, alarmed by his presence, quickly told him that they should avoid engaging in any cardio session here, especially because Somi would be back soon. But Do-hoon seemed unbothered. He casually remarked that it wasn't a big deal. Even if they were caught, he didn't mind showing everything. Yet, after that, they started performing cardio sessions together. Han Somi had gone to the mart to pick up something for the guest. As she stood in the middle of the store, she began to wonder why she had rushed there in the first place. If the mart was open 24/7, then there was no reason for her to panic about its closing time. She stood there, pausing in the aisle, and mused silently to herself that perhaps fruits would be a good choice, maybe something like a melon. Her thoughts slowly drifted to the past, to a memory that still lingered in her mind. There was a particular day when she had bullied Do-hoon by forcing him to eat a melon. She clearly remembered instructing him to open his mouth properly so he could eat it. That image came flashing back to her as she looked at the fruits. Shaking off the memory and returning to the present, she made up her mind and decided that she would buy the melon after all. It looked fresh and appetizing. Meanwhile, on the other side, Sohee had turned to Do-hoon and told him that Somi would be arriving soon. Do-hoon had responded casually, mentioning that if they got caught, they could simply show everything to Somi and explain. Sohee, however, began to panic. In his mind, Do-hoon was thinking that Han Somi still seemed uncertain about the situation, and he'd better hurry before things got out of hand. Sohee repeatedly expressed her concern, saying she believed they should stop whatever they were doing. She worried that inviting a subordinate to her house and engaging in such a yoga session would seem absurd if her daughter were to witness any of it. Just then, in her imagination, Somi suddenly returned home and called out to her mother, asking if she was still in the shower. She approached the bathroom and caught sight of both of them engaged in the workout session. Sohee, in a moment of panic, shouted at Somi, telling her she shouldn't be watching such a scene. Somi stood frozen in shock and exclaimed that there was no way this could be happening. Do-hoon, in that imagined moment, was also filled with regret, thinking to himself that if Somi saw him like this, there would be no way to undo the damage. But all of that was merely playing out in Sohee's head. In reality, Somi hadn't returned home yet. Sohee, still in a state of inner turmoil, continued to plead with him to stop the yoga session. Do-hoon, however, told her that he would finish before her daughter returned and hoped that she would cooperate. She assured him that she would cooperate as long as he completed it quickly before Somi arrived. He acknowledged her willingness, but then added that her cooperation alone might not be enough. He urged that they needed to hurry and wrap everything up before his daughter came back. He had looked at her with an amused expression, remarking that she seemed far more excited than he had anticipated. His words caught her slightly off guard, and she turned to him with a puzzled expression, asking him what exactly he meant by that. He told her that if she couldn't say it out loud, he wouldn't hold back, even if her daughter were to walk in on them. Faced with no other option, she finally agreed and said the words, surrendering to the moment. He smirked in satisfaction, praised her with a casual good work, and with that, both of them resumed their cardio session without the slightest trace of guilt. Sometime later, Somi returned from the mart. She entered the house, carrying a shopping bag in one hand. As she stepped through the doorway, Sohee, who had been waiting by the front door, remarked that she had taken a rather long time. Somi, brushing some loose strands of hair from her face, replied that the mart had taken a bit of time to reach, and then asked her mother if she had already finished taking her shower. Still catching her breath, Somi asked casually about Do-hoon's whereabouts. Sohee, maintaining a neutral tone, told her that it had gotten late, so he had already left. Somi paused for a moment, visibly disappointed by the news. With a faint sigh, she muttered that it was unfortunate, as she had hoped to talk to him a little longer. Deep in her thoughts, she felt a quiet ache rising within her. Though she didn't say it aloud, her mind echoed with his name, Sungmin. The realization began to settle in her chest that she truly missed him. The next day, inside the office, during the lunch break, the employees had gathered in the break room, enjoying their midday meal. On the table was a beautifully arranged plate of sliced melon. Do-hoon, noticing the fruit, looked mildly surprised and asked why they had brought melon that day. One of the female employees responded with a smile, saying she had brought it especially for the manager, but added that he should have some too, then politely offered him a slice. She further explained that she had cut it so everyone could share and insisted that he come over and have a piece. Do-hoon hesitated and quietly declined. She gently urged him again, telling him not to be so reserved and just try it. Still resisting, he made an excuse, saying that he had an allergy and couldn't eat melon. As he uttered those words, his mind involuntarily drifted back to a memory that still lingered in the back of his thoughts, the time when he had been bullied by Somi, who had forced him to eat melon despite his reluctance. That day had left a lasting impression on him, one that he hadn't quite shaken off. Returning to the present, he couldn't help but wonder whether she had truly changed. As much as he tried to convince himself otherwise, something inside him whispered that she hadn't. Despite the passing time and new surroundings, she still seemed like the same person he had known before. Just then, Manager Sohee entered the break room, briefly interrupting his thoughts. She glanced at Do-hoon and told him she was heading out for a moment. Miss Dasum stood motionless, and as they strolled off, she looked at both of them, and, turning to her friend, muttered with a feeling of curiosity that a certain something had always seemed strange to her between those two. She asked herself the question whether they were dating or not. Her friend quickly brushed the idea off until she asserted that it was impossible because the manager was a married woman. It just could not happen. Nevertheless, she said, but they are not sure if something is really not happening around. Even Mr. Do-hoon did not appear to be the sort of a guy who could be involved in such things. At the same time, Do-hoon was teasing whether she had become proactive by meeting alone. The implication having startled, he hastened to refute it and explained that it was not at all the case. She started to explain herself and state that the project of the other day was the cause of taking him out, and she had to tell him that she would be making a business trip in 2 days. Do-hoon appeared to be indifferent and wanted to know whether she had taken him all the way out just to say that. The answer to which Sohee was prompted to give was that it was something more, hesitated before going on to say that it was something more about yesterday. He squinted and inquired of her as to what about yesterday. Sohee paused once more and timorously inquired whether by any possibility something had occurred between him and her daughter, Han Somi. Her mind wandered back to the day before, recalling when Han Somi had come to her in frustration, venting about how much trouble she had gone through for Mr. Do-hoon, only for him to leave so abruptly. Somi had muttered regretfully that she should have just come back earlier instead. Sohee had quietly agreed, lost in thought. Somi had then noticed her mother's distracted state and asked if she was feeling unwell. Sohee had responded that it wasn't anything serious, only that she had spent too long bathing. As she thought back on that moment, Sohee realized with a pang of anxiety that she had done the wrestling practice again, but this time with Do-hoon. On top of that, she had said some strange things. The more she thought about it, the more she felt overwhelmed by the complexity of the situation. Later, Somi had asked her if she could call Mr. Do-hoon to hang out again sometime, adding that she really wanted to meet him. Sohee had silently panicked at the suggestion, thinking to herself that there was no way she could let something happen between Somi and Do-hoon as well. Back in the present, Sohee tried to address the situation tactfully. She told Do-hoon that her daughter had seemed eager to grow closer to him, but she hoped he wouldn't get any ideas or misunderstand her intentions. Do-hoon, clearly amused, asked what exactly she meant by that, suggesting, half jokingly, that maybe he should approach her daughter and see where things might lead. Sohee, surprised and flustered, asked him about his words. He smiled and replied that her daughter was close to his age, quite pretty too, but added that he currently had her Sohee as his partner and manager. Given that, he said, there was absolutely no chance he could even think about other women. He reminded her that she should know very well what he meant. Sohee sighed and said that she understood. As Do-hoon walked away, his thoughts raced. Things were progressing faster than he had expected. Han Somi clearly wanted to grow closer to him. He wasn't sure whether Sohee merely suspected something or had already confirmed it in her mind. Either way, he hadn't anticipated her bringing up such a topic. He decided firmly that any unnecessary contact should be avoided from now on. On his way back, he crossed paths with Miss again. She stopped him, pretending curiosity as she asked where he had been. Do-hoon looked at her with a hint of concern, wondering what she was doing there, quickly assured him that she hadn't been following him, then laughed in a light-hearted way. She commented on how surprising it was to see him coming back from a conversation with the manager. Do-hoon stared at her, puzzled, wondering how long she had been standing there. She continued with casual small talk, asking if he had been discussing a project with the manager and remarked that it looked like he was working hard on it. Do-hoon grew uneasy. He hadn't heard the door open or any footsteps. It dawned on him that she might have been there from the very beginning. His mind raced that maybe she had seen anything. A few days later, both Do-hoon and So-hee prepared for a business trip. They met at Seoul Station. Upon arriving, So-hee mentioned that she was going to buy some bottled water and asked him to check the train schedule. He agreed and took a seat on a bench, pulling out a cigarette as he began to reflect. He thought to himself that while he was fine with the business trip, he was confused and slightly annoyed that system manager Dasum was also coming along. He had made plans expecting it to be just the two of them. Feeling the weight of disappointment, he walked over to Dasum and pointed out that the trip was originally meant only for him and the manager. Dasum replied with a shrug that she had been added at the last minute, and the manager had asked her to help out as a seminar assistant. Do-hoon listened quietly, feeling more and more convinced that So-hee had planned it this way. He wondered if she had orchestrated the whole situation to keep things in check. Sensing the awkward silence, tried to change the topic by commenting on how bright the sky was. Do-hoon internally concluded that things could easily get complicated if they had been alone on the trip. Perhaps, he thought, So-hee had brought Daesum along intentionally to serve as a barrier. Trying to keep things casual, he offered to buy Daesum a cigarette and asked if she wanted one. She nodded, and he replied with a nice before heading off. Instead of going straight to the cigarette stall, he headed to the shop where So-hee had gone for bottled water. Spotting her there, she turned around, surprised to see him, and asked if something was wrong. The shopkeeper interrupted, stating the cost of the water as 1,500 won. Do-hoon casually said that he came to buy cigarettes and asked the shopkeeper for 2 boxes of Moebius. As he waited, he thought to himself that this was probably the right time to tell her something. As the shopkeeper handed over his purchase, Do-hoon picked up an extra item that was a pack of helmets, and he walked over to So-hee and handed it to the shopkeeper, requesting it be added to his bill. He then looked at So-hee and told her, with a steady gaze, that he was genuinely looking forward to the trip because now there was no place to hide. So-hee stared at him, visibly confused and shocked. So-hee returned to Miss Daesum with a grateful smile and thanked her sincerely, expressing that she must have been caught off guard by the sudden call. She appreciated her making the effort to come despite the short notice. Daesum responded warmly, assuring her that it was no problem at all. So-hee then requested her assistance for the seminar preparation, saying it would be a big help just for today. Daesum agreed, although she admitted with a light chuckle that she wasn't sure how much assistance she could actually provide, especially since Mr. Do-hoon was also present. Do-hoon chimed in with a friendly tone, remarking that it was his first time attending a seminar like this, so he expected to learn a lot from both of them. As the three of them settled into their seats on the train, Miss Daesum casually handed a packet of biscuits to Do-hoon, telling him that she had picked them up earlier on her way to the station. Do-hoon thanked her politely, but inwardly, he was reflecting on how the situation was growing more complicated. He hadn't anticipated that So-hee would bring along the assistant manager, and it was beginning to feel as if the dynamic between them was being subtly monitored. As he ate the biscuits, a few crumbs stuck near the corner of his mouth. So-hee noticed this and, without hesitation, reached out gently to wipe it off. She lightly scolded him for eating so carelessly, teasing that he was letting the crumbs fall all over his face. Do-hoon grew visibly shy at the unexpected gesture, but didn't say anything in response. So-hee quickly pulled back and apologized, realizing she might have invaded his personal space. She asked if she had come too close. Do-hoon, trying not to reveal his flustered state, assured her it was perfectly fine, even though he was thinking to himself that he had no plans of backing off so easily, no matter how awkward things became. So-hee murmured that, of course it was awkward, acknowledging the strangeness of the moment. Miss Daesum, who sat beside them, quietly observed the interaction. Her thoughts drifted as she wondered why everyone seemed so fixated on each other. The image of the previous day returned to her mind. She remembered seeing So-hee and Do-hoon together and overhearing snippets of their conversation. Something about their closeness and the familiarity in their tone made her feel uneasy. From her perspective, it was becoming more and more apparent that the manager and Do-hoon were growing too close for comfort. Once they arrived at the destination for the business trip, the welcoming committee greeted them warmly and thanked them for coming. So-hee responded modestly, saying it wasn't a big deal. She then introduced her own team members to the hosts and, turning to Daesum, politely asked her to take the printed seminar materials and get the copies made as discussed. Meanwhile, Do-hoon offered to assist So-hee in setting up the seminar room, volunteering without hesitation. She accepted his help with a thankful smile, acknowledging that his support was greatly appreciated. Daesum, standing quietly nearby, observed their exchange, and silently noted how comfortable and synchronized they seemed, almost as if they had done this kind of thing many times before. Inwardly, Dasom found it surprising that Sohee, a married woman with a child, would carry such a dynamic with a subordinate from the same team. She reflected on how casually Sohee expressed her gratitude to Do-hoon. Those words felt oddly familiar, almost habitual. It left her wondering whether there was more to their relationship than met the eye. At the seminar room, hosted by headquarters, Sohee and Do-hoon got to work. They began preparing the space efficiently, working side by side. As they arranged the projector and cables, Do-hoon leaned in slightly and remarked that it was finally just the two of them. Sohee glanced at him with a frown and asked what he meant by that, before quickly telling him to adjust the light well and focus on the task. Do-hoon helped her as instructed, but inside, he was kicking himself for speaking without thinking. He wondered if his words had bothered her. Sohee, clearly flustered by the atmosphere, asked him to stop saying such inappropriate things. She reminded him firmly that Miss Dasom was present, and they were working outside in a professional environment. She stressed that they were here for work and that nothing of the sort he was suggesting could or should happen under these circumstances. Eventually, after thorough preparations, the seminar room was ready. Sohee looked satisfied and commented cheerfully that everything had finally been arranged. She then asked Do-hoon to check whether the screen looked fine. However, he seemed more interested in making use of the remaining time. He thought to himself that this could be a perfect opportunity to normalize their playful interactions. Slowly, he began moving closer to her again. Sensing his intention, Sohee immediately questioned him, asking what he thought he was doing. She reminded him sternly that they couldn't engage in their usual workout session in this setting. Do-hoon smirked and replied that it was a shame, as he had no intention of holding back his urge to cardio training. He acknowledged that the seminar was starting soon, but didn't seem bothered by it. Sohee, now slightly panicked, pointed out that if someone entered the room at that moment, their chances of getting caught would definitely increase. But Do-hoon countered confidently, saying they still had an hour left, maybe even more. The two of them began their familiar wrestling battle together. As Miss pondered the thought of whether she was being oversensitive or not, she was busy taking printouts of some papers. Even though she recognized that she was a woman, she could not refute the fact that the manager was attractive in her eyes. But her behavior became more and more concerning to her, and the difference between what she considered and what she perceived did not leave her indifferent. In the meantime, on the other side, Do-hoon and Sohee were completely absorbed in their exercise. This is when Miss Dasom walked into the identical room and told them that she was done with the printouts. Then she asked them whether they had set up the room. Do-hoon, who had expected her to take a little longer to come, answered that the preparations were only completed a moment ago. Dasom accepted the update and commented that they had done a good job, and asked whether there was something in particular that had been a challenge. Do-hoon explained that he had only been doing what he was told and has not been having any problems. Yet, he had in his mind the growing realization of how near they were approaching. And as more and more he realized it, the more he grew wary of it every minute. Dasom then requested that he could check the copies on her behalf. Meanwhile, Sohee was cowering under the podium and doing what she could to conceal herself before Miss Dasom. Do-hoon had been thinking that they could not afford to be caught and that he had to get the situation settled as soon as possible. He informed Dasom that he had quickly glanced at the files and discovered that they were in good order, and this was a relief to them both. Watching the situation in her hideout, Sohee thought whether he really wanted to go on with their game in the circumstances they were in. Do-hoon next turned to Dasom and thanked her with her constant support, speaking to her fondly as his sister manager. Dasom reproved him that it is he and she who entrusted him with this project initially. Do-hoon replied that the opportunity had enabled him to be closer to the manager. Then, changing the subject, Dasom hesitated a moment and said that she could be going out of subject. When Do-hoon asked what she meant, she hesitantly inquired if something was going on between him and the manager. Caught off guard, Do-hoon appeared surprised and asked her to repeat the question. Dasom clarified that she wasn't sure how to phrase it, but it seemed to her as if the two of them were getting along unusually well, perhaps too well for a professional setting. Do-hoon suspected that she might have seen them on the staircase the other day, but instead of addressing it directly, he diverted the conversation. Laughing awkwardly, he denied any such possibility and explained that no matter how beautiful or attractive the manager might be, she was still his superior, and he couldn't possibly view her that way. He added that he had merely seen her daughter once by coincidence and found her very pretty, which had piqued his interest in meeting her. From her hiding place, Sohee thought to herself that this couldn't be happening. Meanwhile, Dasom, noticing Do-hoon's tense expression and his downward gaze, asked if something was wrong and why he kept looking underneath. Do-hoon brushed off the concern, claiming that his legs had gone slightly numb and that it was nothing serious. Sohee, still hiding and thinking quickly, resolved that she couldn't allow him to get any closer to her or to her precious daughter, Somi. She made up her mind to satisfy him quickly and bring everything to a conclusion once the game was over, no matter how uncomfortable the situation had become. Do-hoon, on the other hand, was determined not to let So-hee go without fully engaging in the game. Despite the tension of the moment, he found himself drawn into it, believing that ending it abruptly would only leave him with regrets. Suddenly, Dasum looked around and asked where the manager had gone. As she glanced toward the podium, something caught her attention. She narrowed her eyes and asked aloud what the faint vibrating sound was, wondering aloud if it was coming from underneath the podium. Her curiosity was growing, and so was the silence in the room. Do-hoon stood frozen for a moment, completely taken aback, as it suddenly struck him that they had completely forgotten about their phone. The realization sent a jolt through him. It could have exposed them entirely. At that exact moment, Miss Dasum approached, her expression curious yet cautious, as she asked if, by any chance, there was a manager present somewhere down there. Her voice held a trace of suspicion that didn't go unnoticed. She walked toward the podium slowly, her eyes scanning the space until she caught sight of manager So-hee crouching awkwardly behind it. With confusion written all over her face, Dasum looked directly at her and asked what she was doing there, her voice laced with concern. So-hee, clearly startled, stammered as she tried to explain. She said she had been trying to connect some plugs and admitted that she might have picked the wrong time to emerge. Her voice trembled slightly, and she awkwardly asked if she had startled her. Dasum stared at her mind filled with questions. Something felt off. She thought to herself that So-hee looked oddly flustered, almost as if she had swallowed something. On top of that, there was an unusual smell in the air, making the entire atmosphere feel even more uncomfortable. Embarrassment surged through her chest, as her mind instinctively wondered what exactly the two had been doing in that space. Trying to salvage the situation, Do-hoon quickly stepped in with an explanation. He clarified that So-hee had been connecting a cable down there, and since the area was too narrow for him to fit in, she had volunteered to do it. Dasum responded with a nod, her expression softening slightly as she said she understood. She mentioned that there was still some time left before the seminar began, but despite her composed tone, her thoughts remained unsettled. No matter how much she tried to dismiss her suspicions, the whole situation seemed odd and hard to explain away. She then said, almost as if deciding to remove herself from the atmosphere, that she would go out and buy some beverages. As she turned to leave the hall, her mind buzzed with unease. She couldn't shake the strangeness of what she had just witnessed. Still puzzled, she exited the room. With Dasum gone, the air felt lighter, and So-hee looked at Do-hoon with a mixture of irritation and disbelief. She blamed him for almost getting them caught and told him that he was being incredibly reckless. If they had been just a few seconds slower, she said, Dasum would have caught them red-handed. Frustrated, she asked what on earth he was thinking right now. Do-hoon, as calm as ever, simply replied that they were just continuing their wrestling session. His tone was nonchalant, as though nothing unusual had happened. So he warned him again, saying it was too risky to be playing in that room at that time. But he brushed off her concern, saying he wasn't satisfied with the level he was currently on and needed to level up further before stopping. So he looked at him incredulously and said that continuing was out of the question. They had no idea who might come in next, and the seminar would begin very soon. But Do-hoon was persistent. He told her that she knew him well enough to understand he wouldn't stop so easily. His eyes were determined, and there was a playful smirk on his lips. She frowned and reminded him that they had already come dangerously close to getting caught by Dasum, and she couldn't possibly feel okay about risking that again. Just as she was about to say more, her phone started to ring repeatedly. It was her daughter, Han So-mi. Do-hoon glanced at the phone and remarked with a grin that the timing couldn't be more ironic. He looked at her and pointed out that her phone was ringing and that her daughter was calling her. Without waiting for permission, he picked up the call and held the phone to So-hee's ear, encouraging her to answer. Startled, So-hee snapped at him, asking why he had even picked up the call in the first place. Do-hoon, however, simply explained that it had looked like she was too flustered to do it herself, so he had stepped in. He urged her not to stop now, reminding her that her daughter was already on the line. On the other end, Han So-mi had been calling continuously, her voice laced with worry. She wondered aloud whether her mother had arrived safely since she hadn't been answering. The moment So-hee answered, Han So-mi greeted her with concern, asking if everything was all right. Hearing her daughter's voice brought a sudden wave of guilt and nervousness to So-hee. She quietly responded that she could hear her now. Han So-mi's voice softened as she asked if her mother had been too busy to answer earlier. So-hee apologized and told her that she was indeed busy with seminar preparations. Han So-mi, not convinced, pressed further. She asked what exactly was going on and whether everything was truly all right. So-hee replied that everything was fine, repeating that she was just preparing for the seminar and would call back later. But Han So-mi didn't let it go. She mentioned that her mother's breathing sounded strange, too fast and heavy. So-hee, growing more self-conscious, thought to herself that if she continued training while on the call, Han Somi would eventually figure everything out. Do-hoon, sensing her discomfort, leaned closer and offered an apology for interrupting her call. Suddenly, Han Somi asked sharply whether someone was with her. She had clearly heard a man's voice in the background and wanted to know what was going on. Before So-hee could even form a reply, Do-hoon spoke again, trying to smooth things over. He said that everything would be fine and urged So-hee to quickly finish the call so they could resume their workout session without further interruptions. On the phone, Han Somi grew more suspicious and alarmed. She asked once more what exactly was happening. She demanded to know about the situation. On her phone calls to her daughter, Han Somi, So-hee informed her in a calm tone that she would call back later. Somi, who was always easygoing, told her that she would hang up but be sure that she did not forget to call her as soon as the work was done. The call concluded on that. Do-hoon turned to So-hee and said a few words of appreciation once she put the phone down, with a slight smile on her face. He praised her for the good job and said that he would have loved to carry on with their training session, but the meeting of the company would soon begin. In a low tone, he said that he would come to her room later in the night to have a cardio session. His voice was familiar, but there was something about his look that suggested another acquaintance. In finishing off the comment, he once more thanked her, as he had done before, on the work. The night was coming in, and when the meeting was over, So-hee and Miss Dasum and Do-hoon sat together in a hushed bar, taking their drinks and their supper. So-hee lifted her glass and cheered the day to success, and complimented all. She said that the seminar had proceeded easily, and that she wanted everybody to have fun eating and drinking freely as a reward for their hard work. Dasum, however, was not able to relax. Something was wrong, but her instincts told her. So-hee was of a cheery nature, but too refined and too calculated. It wasn't like her usual self. Something had changed, and Dasum felt certain it had occurred in that brief span of time when she wasn't present in the seminar room. She mulled over it with increasing unease. She was thinking that maybe the rumors floating around the office actually have some truth to them. She was also thinking that maybe there is really something going on between manager So-hee and Mr. Do-hoon. Do-hoon, on his part, noticed the way Dasum's eyes lingered, the subtle tension in her shoulders. He recognized the signs of suspicion and realized she had begun to notice the nuances between him and the manager. It was a development he had expected, but now that it was unfolding, he wasn't sure how to handle it. He was thinking if he should confirm her suspicions or simply let them fester into uncertainty. Meanwhile, Dasum was lost in her own internal storm. She wanted to ask about it, but could not get the way. There was no easy way to confront either of them without sounding accusatory or unprofessional. As the drinks flowed and the laughter grew louder, her thoughts became even more entangled. Her head started to spin from the alcohol, blurring the lines between courage and recklessness. Noticing her swaying slightly, Do-hoon leaned over and commented that it looked like she had drunk quite a bit. Dasum, attempting to maintain her pride, denied it outright, her words slightly slurred. She said she was perfectly fine. So-hee, catching her unease, asked gently if she was all right. Dasum thought to herself that she had begun drinking only because it felt too hard to ask certain things in a sober state. She now regretted it, feeling the effects hit harder than expected. She wondered if she had gone too far. Do-hoon, sensing something unsaid, asked her why she had drunk so much. He thought maybe she was trying to say something. Dasum, flustered and tense, denied it again. It wasn't anything important, just foolish curiosity, she thought. This was so annoying. She had drunk for no reason, and now she couldn't even manage to ask what she wanted to. She had only wanted to ask whether they were seeing each other outside of work hours. But now, the opportunity had slipped through her fingers. She sighed deeply, remembering how the two of them had denied dating. But she cannot ignore all those rumors. She was thinking maybe all those rumors were truly meaningless. Standing up, she excused herself to the restroom, her mind clouded by alcohol and jealousy. As she entered the washroom, she noticed with irritation that there was only one stall available. This didn't even feel like a proper public facility. She groaned inwardly, thinking that everything about this night was off. She shouldn't have come at all. It was awkward beyond belief. Her mind, unfiltered by sobriety, continued spiraling. She thought if both of them were really going to exercise later. She sighed that she could not get the reason she can, not even enjoy such things, especially outside of work hours. She didn't understand it. She was not able to understand if there was something attractive about that arrangement anyway. In her frustration, she kicked at the bathroom door, muttering how annoying everything was. The dizziness took over again, and in her intoxicated state, she reached into her bag, pulled out a cigarette, and began to smoke. A few minutes passed when a group of rowdy boys wandered near the washroom. Spotting her, one of them whistled and tried to get her attention by calling her pretty girl and investigating the reason she was alone over there. Another snickered, noting that she looked pretty drunk. One of them offered her more drinks, leaning in closer than necessary. Dasum looked up at them with irritation, unable to hide her disdain. She didn't even respond, her head too heavy for confrontation. Just then, Do-hoon appeared, his expression firm. He stepped between her and the boys and told them politely but sternly to back off. He explained that she was the manager of their group and not someone they could casually mess with. Handing her a new cigarette, he crouched beside her and spoke gently. He asked what she was doing here, reminding her that if she continued smoking like this in front of the restaurant, the owner would definitely scold her. Then, reaching out a hand, he tried to help her up. Dasum, fluttering slightly, told him she hadn't even gone to the bathroom yet and asked him to wait for her outside. Do-hoon sighed, explaining that he couldn't leave when she was clearly too drunk to even walk on her own. She admitted that he had a point, but then cheekily asked if he could play some music. Surely, there had to be something to hear beyond the door to make this scene feel less ridiculous. He asked if she wasn't embarrassed, lying there earlier with her legs practically wide open. She laughed, shocked he had actually said that, but then winced as the dizziness surged again. He told her again that she should not drink that much. She had once told him she couldn't handle alcohol and never drank during company dinners, so she does not have to do it now. Still seated on the bathroom floor, she snapped back, telling him to shut up. She mumbled that it was all because of him and manager Do-hoon. Do-hoon looked at her closely and concluded she hadn't actually seen anything between him and the manager. Her words were based on suspicion, not certainty. And right now, in her current condition, there was no point in trying to clear it up. But then she suddenly turned to him and asked seriously if there is really nothing going on between him and manager Sohee. Do-hoon replied honestly, denying any such relationship. He reminded her that Sohee was a married woman and this will be very inappropriate for them to be in any kind of relationship. Daesum muttered that she understood, though she clearly didn't believe it. If there was nothing, then she should not have to be this suspicious. Still off balance, she suddenly slipped in her heels. Do-hoon caught her swiftly, holding her up. She thanked him, embarrassed, and explained that her feet had slipped. She'd try to get up again on her own, but in her thoughts, she admitted that being drunk had turned her clumsy, and Do-hoon was always the one catching her when she fell. She apologized softly, still flustered, and tried to focus, but their closeness made her uneasy. Do-hoon asked again if she was all right, and she couldn't stop thinking about how strong his scent was, how comforting it oddly felt. She found herself thinking that he smelled good, even in this awkward moment. He repeated her name gently, asking again what was wrong. She finally replied that her stomach was hurting. Time passed, and eventually Dasum woke up to find herself lying in her room. Her head throbbed, and she struggled to remember how she had gotten there. She was sure her last memory was of being in the restaurant bathroom with Do-hoon. She could not remember how she had ended up here. She was thinking that maybe she had really lost control that badly. Groaning, she decided she needed something to recover and made her way out toward the lobby convenience store. She thought to herself that she needed to get over the hangover somehow, but more than that, she dreaded running into Do-hoon. Unfortunately for her, the worst-case scenario awaited. He was already outside, standing near her door. He greeted her casually, noting that she was awake and suggesting she should have rested a bit more. She laughed awkwardly and thanked him for bringing her back, then explained she was heading to the convenience store because she still didn't feel well. In her mind, she scolded herself. She should have just slept off the hangover instead. Trying to steer the conversation away from her embarrassment, she asked him what he was doing awake so late. He replied that he couldn't sleep and decided to take a walk, thought bitterly about the timing. Of all the moments to run into him, it had to be now, just as she had planned to pass by the manager's room. The whole situation felt like a cosmic joke. She apologized for what had happened earlier in the bathroom, her voice quiet and ashamed, asking him to please forget it. Do-hoon looked at her with curiosity and asked if something was wrong. She quickly shook her head, saying everything was fine. It was just that he had looked kind of cute at that moment. He watched her thoughtfully, suspecting she had been troubled by the rumors circulating through the company. Her worried expression made it clear that the thought had weighed heavily on her mind. Thinking it wasn't the right place to discuss this in the hallway, he suggested they move inside to talk more privately. In his thoughts, he realized that whatever tension was building between them, it wasn't something he could simply brush aside anymore. Lee Sohee sat quietly in her room, feeling a mixture of discomfort and curiosity. It was strange to be doing a workout session on a business trip, and she couldn't help but wonder what would happen if they were caught by assistant manager Dasum. The thought made her uneasy. She glanced down at her phone, noticing the time, and thought about Mr. Do-hoon, who seemed to be running late. She wondered what he was doing and whether he had left the hotel yet. In the adjacent room, number 303, Do-hoon was carefully massaging Miss Dasum's feet. She looked at him with a questioning expression, asking what exactly he was doing. Do-hoon explained that he was making sure her ankle was okay after her recent fall. He added that now he understood why his own legs had been aching and that he had done similar recuperation exercises before and recognized the strain. However, told him not to continue, asking him to stop what he was doing, but he ignored her protest and kept massaging her feet gently. He expressed relief that it wasn't a sprain or fracture. Then, almost hesitantly, mentioned the kiss they had shared earlier. Daesum's face flushed with embarrassment, and Do-hoon realized that this situation was not what he had planned, but he quickly recognized it as a good opportunity. He thought to himself that this could be the perfect moment to establish a new foothold in the company and possibly gain influence over manager Lee. Spoke aloud, half-jokingly, about how it was a pity she wanted him to forget the kiss, admitting that he had liked it more than he expected. Internally, he resolved that, before moving on to anything else, he needed to win over assistant manager Daesum first. Suddenly, he decided to start a workout session with her, catching her off guard. Daesum asked what he was doing all of a sudden. Do-hoon reminded her that she had started something similar first at the bar, so now it was his turn. She tried to calm him down and insisted they shouldn't be doing that here, wondering silently if all this was somehow her fault. Do-hoon brought up the kiss again, stating that she had kissed him earlier because she was drunk, and now he was feeling a little drunk himself. Daesum admitted that the kiss was her fault, but emphasized that this was a completely different situation. She wanted to stop him, but her thoughts were growing hazy, and she found herself becoming distracted. Now, as she asked how they would face each other at the office after what had happened, he thought it might be in his favor. She was too out of it to think clearly or speak properly. He remarked that despite her tough reputation at work, she was actually shyer than he had expected. She then said that they should forget everything, brushing it off as something that had happened under the influence of alcohol, and insisted they should just stop now. But he countered her statement, saying that even if it was a mistake, just for that day, they should go ahead and complete their workout session. Meanwhile, So-hee was sitting alone in her room, visibly anxious as she kept thinking about him and Miss Daesum. She received a call and assumed it was from Miss Daesum, thinking that since she had been drinking earlier, perhaps she was finally awake, especially given how loud everything seemed. She recalled that he had also mentioned he would come, but now it seemed like he wasn't going to show up that day. At the same time, So-hee was busy talking on the phone with her daughter, who was asking whether her mother was even listening to her. So-hee quickly apologized, admitting that she had been distracted by some other thoughts that came over her all of a sudden. Then she began wondering to herself why she kept thinking about all this. It was a good thing for him to come anyway, so she should not have to think about it that much. Her daughter asked her again what they had been talking about, and they resumed their conversation. Her daughter added that she would come to pick her up the next day. So-hee acknowledged this and replied that she would see her tomorrow, wishing her good night as their call came to an end. So-hee sat quietly in her room, her fingers slowly stirring the coffee in her mug as thoughts swirled through her mind. Her eyes lingered on the dark liquid, but her focus was far from it. Despite everything, Mr. Do-hoon hadn't reached out to her in the end. That silence, that lingering absence of even a single message, made her wonder if something was wrong, if something had changed between them. The uncertainty gnawed at her as the day moved on. Elsewhere, Do-hoon was standing next to Dae, stretching his arms tiredly. With a slight groan, he remarked that they had ended up doing cardio training all the way until dawn. Rubbing the back of his neck, he told her it was time they got ready to leave, addressing her politely as assistant manager. His voice was casual, but there was a faint trace of exhaustion behind it. Eventually, the entire group arrived at the station, each person looking worn from the trip, yet prepared to return to their usual routines. As they stood waiting for the train, Do-hoon could feel a sharp ache shooting up his back. The pain was unmistakably from the extended cardio session. Grumbling slightly, he turned to the manager and offered a small smile, telling her she had done well on the trip. Daesum, caught off guard by the compliment, turned her gaze away and hesitated before replying that it was actually him who had done more than she did. Her voice was soft, and a touch of pink colored her cheeks. Internally, her thoughts were jumbled. Despite everything that had happened, he seemed fine, relaxed, even, but he promised he would come the day before. As they reached their destination, Do-hoon glanced over at Daesum again, noting how uncomfortable she had looked during the train ride. Concerned, he asked if she was feeling all right now. He reasoned that after staying up so late, it was only natural to feel worn out. Daesum hesitated, clearly flustered, and told him to keep quiet. Then, muttering something, she turned her head away, her mind spinning. She had fully pushed him away, at least that's what she believed. But Do-hoon seemed unaffected. With a half smile, he admitted that he still couldn't believe the two of them had ended up doing cardio training together all night. Daesum's face flushed with embarrassment as she mumbled that she never intended for it to happen. Confused, he questioned her about what exactly she meant by intent. She looked at him, her thoughts tangled. There was no way he could like someone like her. Maybe he had someone else in mind. And yet, something about the way he treated her made her uncertain. She knew that if she let herself get swept up in this, things would only become more complicated. Still, deep down, she couldn't deny it. He liked her now, and she had decided this moment would remain their little secret. He smiled again and said they should move forward from now on together. Feeling overwhelmed, responded that she would be heading out first. She wasn't feeling well since the day before and needed some time to rest. She told him they would meet again at the office. Sohee, watching the scene unfold from a short distance, asked in concern if Miss Dasum was feeling unwell and what had happened. Do-hoon shrugged and casually replied that it was possible, considering how much they had overworked themselves the previous day. He then announced that he would also be leaving, to which Sohee responded that it was fine. As he walked away, Do-hoon reflected on everything. Even the assistant manager's reaction hadn't been negative. In fact, it felt like he had been unnecessarily impatient with her during their training session. But despite that, things had ended well. He considered how this incident might influence things at the company. With Dasum and others aware of his relationship with the manager, perhaps people would stop gossiping about it for a while. He told himself it was better to deal with any risks early, before anyone could catch on. For now, he needed to proceed carefully and take things slowly. There was a faint sense of fear lurking within him, fear of being misunderstood or caught, but he reassured himself that things were all right, at least for now. As he continued walking, lost in thought, he suddenly felt a jolt. A blonde girl had bumped into him, coffee cup in hand, and the entire contents of the cup spilled across his shirt. Startled, she gasped and immediately apologized, looking deeply embarrassed. She muttered that it was dangerous to walk like that and seemed horrified by her clumsiness. Do-hoon looked at her with restrained irritation but kept his tone calm, telling her it was fine. He asked how far she planned to follow him, clearly confused. The girl, still looking guilty, insisted on paying for his laundry, stating firmly that the mess was her fault. He tried to wave her off, saying it wasn't a big deal and that she was pressing the issue unnecessarily. Still, she persisted. It was her mistake, and she wanted to take responsibility. He finally looked at her properly and thought she seemed genuinely kind. Despite this being their first encounter, she had an air of sweetness so unlike someone else he knew. She admitted that she just felt bad for causing trouble. He repeated that it was just an accident and that she didn't need to worry. She smiled shyly and complimented him, saying he was a good person for not getting angry. Jokingly, she added that it wasn't like she'd thrown the coffee at him on purpose. Then she mentioned that unlike her older sister, she was clumsy and often broke things. Do-hoon chuckled, telling her that she still seemed like a decent person. In a world full of difficult people, she stood out for her sincerity. The fact that she could apologize openly spoke volumes about her upbringing. He said he'd accept her apology, and if they happened to meet again, she could buy him lunch instead. A bit surprised but amused, he laughed and agreed. Curious, he asked her whether she had any errands in the area. She replied that she was waiting for someone and then suddenly exclaimed that the person had arrived her unnie. A tall woman approached, asking if she had waited long. The blonde girl smiled and shook her head. Do-hoon turned to glance at the newcomer, only to freeze in complete shock. It was Han-somi. She greeted her sister and casually mentioned that she had arrived late due to traffic. She also explained that she came along because she thought their mother would be returning from her business trip, but the moment she caught sight of Do-hoon, her expression lit up. She exclaimed that it was so nice to see him again, and added, with unmistakable excitement, that she had really wanted to meet him. Do-hoon stood there, paralyzed with disbelief and revulsion. His eyes flicked between the blonde girl and Han-somi, the pieces suddenly clicking into place. He was stunned how it was even possible to run into her again like this. And more importantly, he wondered about the relationship between Han-somi and the blonde girl who had just spilled coffee on him. He soon came to the realization that both of them were actually sisters. The younger sister, appearing delighted, called out with cheerful energy, expressing that her unnie had finally arrived. Han-somi, catching her breath, responded warmly and asked if she had been waiting long. She apologized for being late, brushing a few strands of hair from her face, clearly trying to recover from rushing. The younger sister, still smiling, tilted her head and curiously inquired whether she knew Mr. Do-hoon. Han-somi acknowledged that she did. She explained that he had visited their house not too long ago, worked in the same company as their mother, and was surprisingly easy to get along with. She added that he had a certain warm presence, and it would be nice to get to know someone like him better. Do-hoon, who had remained mostly quiet until then, stood near them, visibly hesitant. He struggled to maintain eye contact and awkwardly greeted them. Inwardly, his thoughts were spiraling into panic. This situation, he realized, was far messier than he had anticipated. He hadn't thought this through at all, and now there was no clear way out. The younger sister seemed intrigued and leaned in a bit, commenting that it all sounded quite interesting. She noted that if he was really that nice, Somi should definitely try to become closer to him. Han-somi, puzzled by her sister's ease, turned to her and asked if the two of them knew each other from before. Before her sister could reply, Do-hoon quickly interjected, attempting to control the situation. He confessed that the only connection was an unfortunate incident where he had accidentally spilled her coffee. Privately, he regretted letting his guard down, and every second that passed made him more anxious. He thought to himself that he needed to leave the scene before it grew any more complicated. Hansomi looked at him and, with a calm yet firm voice, remarked that it seemed her sister might have caused him some trouble. If that were the case, she said she would like to make it up to him. Addressing him politely as Lee Sung-min, she continued, saying that she was genuinely sorry. There was something uncanny about the way he looked. He reminded her so much of her old classmate from school. The resemblance, she added, was almost eerie. They had been very close back then, and seeing him brought those memories flooding back. At that moment, Do-hoon's mind began to spiral again, dragged unwillingly into the shadows of his past. Images returned, sharp and vivid. He saw himself being bullied, humiliated, and made to feel small. He could hear her voice and those of the seniors as they scolded him. They had mocked him ruthlessly, berating him for not tipping them off when the principal was nearby. They told him that he had to keep his mouth shut, and because of him, they are in big trouble. They also scolded him, saying that because of him, they would not be able to do smoking in the school and calling him an idiot. Another voice had told them to stop hitting him, suggesting that they might actually injure him, but the others ignored the concern. Someone had remarked that Sung-min wasn't usually like this, and another noted that this was why he never joined them for meals. One of the girls ordered him to take off his glasses. When he hesitated, she forcibly removed them herself. He had tried to plead with them, saying that it was his mistake, and asking them to stop, but his words only added fuel to their mockery. She had laughed and jeered that he almost pissed himself, and said that he had shit in his pants too. They continued to taunt and bully him mercilessly, warning that if he ever dared report them, he'd be the one held guilty. One of them even shoved a cigarette into his mouth and told him to suck it, as if that final act would seal his humiliation. When he came back to the present, the contrast between then and now felt jarring. Looking at Hansomi again, he asked with a forced calm if she had really been that close to her old classmate. Hansomi smiled softly and said that he had been a truly kind person, very easy to talk to. She hadn't thought much about him at the time, but meeting Do-hoon brought back memories and made it feel like a happy coincidence. Do-hoon nodded stiffly and said she was right. The classmate had been a lucky guy to have known her. Glancing down at his watch, he offered a polite excuse, saying he had taken too much of their time and the manager would be arriving at the station any minute. Her sister, still curious and slightly suspicious, asked Somi if the man had been her ex-classmate. Hansomi quickly denied it, explaining that he simply resembled someone from her past. Still, she confessed that she was glad to have met him. Those days had been long buried, but now she was even considering putting together a class reunion. Do-hoon, walking away from the scene, was lost in thought. He told himself that he had been far too cautious lately, moving slowly and deliberately, but things needed to change. From this point onward, it was game on. A few days later, he was sitting with Sohee during one of their usual meetings. She looked at him intently and asked whether the rumor she'd heard was true. Do-hoon let out a sigh and admitted that he thought assistant manager Dasum might have discovered something about them. As always, he added, rumors were everywhere in the office, and recent incidents would only make them worse. That was why he hadn't shown up that night. He was trying to prevent further gossip. He apologized, so he recalled that he had always denied any connection before, but now things felt different. She told him that perhaps it was time to stop hiding and just come clean about their relationship. He chuckled dryly, commenting on the passion that existed between them, before mocking her a little. He suggested she wouldn't actually go through with it after all. Such a revelation would be deeply shameful for a married woman like her. Offended, so he asked what exactly he was trying to imply. Do-hoon avoided a direct answer and instead suggested they have another cardio session that night. He told her that afterward, they could put everything to rest for her sake. She hesitated, internally weighing the consequences. She recalled how suspicious Miss Dasum's behavior had been before, and realized they needed to stop before things escalated. If Do-hoon truly intended to end it, then maybe one last time would be acceptable. She asked him if he really meant it. He nodded and said, of course. After that, both of them started performing workout sessions together. He mentioned that today was the last day of the exercise training, and it would be a shame to end it like this, addressing her as manager. He was thinking that she seemed quite addicted to the cardio training. After the game finished, she asked again if this really was the last time. He reassured her that it was, and even suggested they could meet up sometime with her daughter for tea. Surprised, she told him to stop talking about her daughter because she didn't understand what he meant. He explained that he wanted to get closer to her daughter, and then asked why that mattered. After she questioned him, he went on to explain that, in fact, her daughter Somi and he had attended the same school. They had been classmates. Sohee was having the flashback when had been sitting quietly in a dimly lit room at her house, immersed in something that kept her unusually focused. The space around her was silent except for the faint rustle of paper. The atmosphere felt still, nostalgic. Just then, the door creaked open and her daughter, Somi, stepped into the room. With a flick of the switch, the room lit up, making Sohee momentarily blink at the sudden brightness. Somi looked surprised and asked her mother in a curious tone what she was doing and what exactly she was looking at. Her gaze drifted toward the table, where she noticed a familiar item, the old high school yearbook, the same one that had collected dust on their bookshelf for years. Somi's face lit up with recognition and a playful smile as she approached her mother. She commented excitedly that her mother was looking at her high school yearbook and pointed out how long it had been since they last opened it. She asked with genuine interest what had made her revisit it. All of a sudden, her voice filled with both amusement and curiosity. Sohee let out a light laugh, brushing the question aside with a dismissive wave of her hand. She told Somi there wasn't any particular reason and that it was nothing serious. But behind her smile, her mind wandered elsewhere. As she stood up, the lightness in her expression faltered slightly. Her thoughts circled back to a frustrating realization. She hadn't been able to find Do-hoon's photo in the yearbook. The absence nagged at her, and she contemplated whether she should simply ask him about it directly. But just as the idea began to form, her mind slipped into a memory. She recalled Do-hoon casually suggesting once to bring Somi along next time. That single line had lodged itself in her memory. Returning to the present, she shook her head gently and thought to herself that no, this was something she had to prevent. She couldn't allow someone like Do-hoon to get close to Somi. There was something uneasy, something unspoken, lingering under the surface. It was her responsibility as a mother to protect her daughter from what she couldn't yet explain. Somi remained seated, holding the yearbook in her hands. She looked at her mother with mild confusion, sensing that something had just shifted in the air. Her brows furrowed slightly as she thought to herself that the situation felt odd. Still, she decided not to press it, and instead, quietly whispered to herself that maybe she was just overthinking things. The next day at the office, casual chatter floated through the air as employees gathered in small groups, sharing gossip and observations. One of them leaned in, lowering their voice as they commented that Sohee and Do-hoon always seemed to be together, even on business trips. With a teasing tone, the employee speculated on who might be pursuing whom. Another chuckled, saying that if Sohee was involved, it had to be Do-hoon chasing her. Just then, Da-sum joined their conversation, her tone sharp but composed as she countered their assumptions. She clarified that they were mistaken. She had been with them on that particular business trip and had observed nothing to suggest a romantic connection between them. She firmly stated that Do-hoon knew right from wrong and emphasized how hardworking he was. According to her, the only reason they were often seen together was that they kept being assigned to the same projects. One of her colleagues smirked at her sudden defensiveness and jokingly asked if she had a crush on Do-hoon. Da-sum's face immediately flushed with color as she denied it with an awkward laugh, insisting that the idea was absurd. Her colleague raised an eyebrow, remarking that he had never seen her defend anyone so strongly before. Realizing they had touched a nerve, the others quickly backtracked and apologized for speaking poorly of Do-hoon in front of her. They promised they'd be more careful moving forward and acknowledged that they should have picked up on her discomfort. Da-sum tried to dismiss it, insisting she hadn't meant to make such a big deal out of it, and urged them to stop talking about Sohee and Do-hoon altogether. What none of them realized was that Do-hoon had overheard everything. Standing just out of view, he listened with quiet satisfaction. He thought to himself that thanks to that trip, he had gained a valuable ally in Da-sum. He smirked internally, wondering how he might use this to his advantage later. As the conversation faded, Da-sum turned and found herself startled. Do-hoon had approached. He teased her lightly, commenting that her colleagues had all left her alone and suggesting that they go out for a smoke. Flustered, she tried to explain herself, insisting that it wasn't what it looked like. She asked him if he had been eavesdropping. Do-hoon admitted that he had been about to walk in but overheard their conversation. He thanked her for standing up for him. She replied honestly, saying she already knew there was nothing going on between him and manager Sohee, especially since they hadn't really spoken since the business review. He nodded in agreement, saying that Sohee was still his supervisor and that it was a promise. Then, as they walked together, another memory resurfaced. He had once told Sohee it would be the last time they had a late-night workout session together. He also recalled Sohee's surprised expression when he mentioned having gone to the same school as Somi. She had asked him directly if that had bothered her that much. Do-hoon had responded truthfully, explaining that he and Somi used to be quite close, but during their recent encounter, she didn't seem to recognize him. He had hoped to use Sohee's help to get closer to Somi again, but decided not to push it. He had told Sohee not to worry and reassured her that he'd handle it on his own before wishing her good night. Now, standing beside Da-sum in the present, he acknowledged inwardly that, ever since that conversation, he had stopped making any moves towards Sohee, acting as though nothing had ever existed between them. As they walked down the hallway, Sohee happened to pass by them. She called out briefly, addressing him as Mr. Do-hoon, but didn't say anything else and quickly walked away. Da-sum blinked in confusion and asked if Sohee had just called him. She found it strange that she didn't stop to talk and instead just left. Changing the subject, Do-hoon asked Dasum if she was doing a presentation with So-hee that day. She nodded, saying she was. He hesitated for a moment, then casually asked if he could take her place, even though it was a last-minute request. Later that day, in the company's main meeting room, the current presenter wrapped up their segment and announced that the next presentation would be given by Miss So-hee from PR Team 2. She was invited to come forward, and the room's attention shifted toward her. As So-hee stepped onto the stage, employees exchanged hushed remarks about her. They admired how youthful she still looked and remembered her past presentations fondly, noting how creative and engaging her ideas had always been. They eagerly anticipated what she had prepared this time. But something was clearly wrong. Her usual composure was missing, and there was an unfamiliar stiffness in her posture. One of the employees whispered that she looked different, almost like she was experiencing stage fright. She gave a small, forced smile and began by saying that, then, they should have begun. At that moment, Do-hoon entered the room, carrying a USB drive or a device in his hand. The timing wasn't lost on So-hee. Suddenly, a wave of dizziness hit her. Her vision blurred briefly, and murmurs erupted among the employees. Someone asked if she was okay. Another commented about a strange buzzing noise, wondering whose phone it might be. Yet another said the sound seemed to be coming from the front. So-hee, steadying herself, said it was nothing and that she had just felt a little dizzy. What no one knew was that Do-hoon had planned all of this. Watching from the sidelines, he silently told himself that she couldn't possibly have believed he would let her off that easily. So-hee stood back up straight, her voice regaining a bit of strength as she addressed the room. She announced that she would begin the presentation on behalf of PR Team 2. Do-hoon, watching her intently, thought to himself with an edge of challenge he wanted to see how long she could endure that. The other people who were present in the conference room became very surprised by her unusual behavior and began to notice that something was not normal with her. In response, So-hee spoke from the front and said that she was fine and that she was only feeling a little dizzy. She tried to sound calm so that no one would suspect anything else. Do-hoon stood there, thinking to himself that he had no intention of letting her go. He remained in his place, watching her closely. After that, she began her presentation. A candidate's image appeared on the projector screen, and she pointed toward it while explaining her opinion. She stated that Actor C's projects presented a colder and more modern image than Actor A's, while Miss A was more suitable for an over-cooperative image. 1 hour earlier, So-hee had been thinking continuously about the fact that Do-hoon and So-mi had once been classmates. She reflected on this idea again and again, and she finally accepted that it was true that he had been a classmate of her daughter So-mi. While she was lost in these thoughts, So-mi suddenly came from behind and hugged her mother tightly. So-hee smiled warmly and asked her daughter whether she had just returned from her part-time job. So-mi replied that her job was not important at that moment and insisted that her mother should first look at something very important. She then took out her phone and showed it to her, explaining excitedly that she had passed the first interview. She added that she was the only person in her group who had passed, and that she believed this achievement was a very big deal for her future. So-hee became extremely excited and surprised after hearing this. She carefully looked at the phone screen and confirmed that So-mi's name was clearly written there. She proudly told So-mi that she was right and said that she felt very proud of her. She mentioned that So-mi had been working at a part-time job to pay her tuition fees while also preparing seriously for her interviews. She expressed her happiness and added sadly that she had not even been able to send her to the aviation department. So-mi responded by saying that it had been her own decision not to go there. So-hee then told her daughter that she had done a very good job. She explained that if So-mi had gone there, it would have been difficult for her as well, and therefore it was better this way. So-hee thought deeply to herself that So-mi was her smart and precious daughter and that she was very proud of her. At the same time, she also thought firmly that she would never allow a man like Do-hoon to get close to her daughter So-mi. At that moment, the door of the room suddenly opened and Do-hoon entered inside. He looked directly at So-hee and told her that he would join her in the meeting. After that, both of them ended up going to the seminar center together. While walking, Do-hoon said that they had once again ended up attending the presentation together. So-hee replied that she hoped he was not thinking of anything strange or inappropriate. He answered that there was no way he was thinking of something like that, and added that these days, she probably did not have much time because she was busy with So-mi. Then he congratulated her and said that her daughter had passed the first interview of the airline company. So-hee became very surprised and asked him how he knew about this news. He reminded her that they had been classmates in the past and said that he was very happy for So-mi. He further explained that with her mother's support and help, So-mi had achieved the dream that she had been pursuing for a very long time. He described So-mi as an amazing child who did not like to open herself in front of her parents. He also said that she was a good and intelligent girl who had suffered because she had careless parents and had struggled a lot in her life. So-hee felt very embarrassed after hearing these words and told him that it would be better if he did not say such things so casually and openly. He replied that she seemed completely clueless and said that it was not as if he did not know whether Somi was a good daughter or not, but he was sure that she was not a good person. So he became frustrated and warned him not to cross the line. She told him that she would become angry if he continued talking in such a strange and disrespectful way. However, he continued speaking and said that he believed Somi would fail her next interview and that maybe she would never become a flight attendant. So he immediately told him to stop saying such impossible and hurtful things. In response, he stated that when it came to becoming a flight attendant, a person's image was extremely important. He added that everything Somi had done in the past with him was something that even her parents were completely unaware of. So he began shouting at him and ordered him to remain silent, demanding that he tell her everything he knew. She insisted that he must reveal whatever information he had about her daughter. In response, he asked her whether she was truly capable of handling such truth, and then declared that she would eventually discover everything about her daughter. He claimed that he knew everything about Somi, and also knew about another hidden side of her personality. So he started thinking deeply about his words, and realized that they suggested there was something about her daughter that she had never known. However, she immediately tried to convince herself that this could not be true. She believed strongly that there was no way such things could be real, and that everything he was saying must be nothing but lies. At that moment, she experienced a flashback of a conversation she had once had with her daughter. In that memory, Somi had confidently told her that she was doing well and only needed to improve her performance in the upcoming interviews. Somi had said that she would study again the next day and then go to sleep. She had explained that she had worked very hard this time and was certain that she would pass. She had promised her mother that she would become successful. So he then returned to the present moment and asked him what exactly he wanted from her. He laughed lightly and questioned whether she was refusing to believe her own daughter and instead choosing to believe him. So he replied firmly that there was no possibility of that. She stated that she completely trusted her daughter because Somi had earned her academic success through her own effort and had studied for her examinations day and night. She added that she did not want to create any problem or obstacle in her daughter's path toward success. He looked at her carefully and commented that she was a good mother. So he then reflected that this was not a matter of believing or disbelieving anyone. She thought that if everything was being done for her child, then she was ready to accept whatever he had said to her. After that, he secretly placed a device on her body that began to irritate and disturb her throughout the entire meeting. Now, returning to the present situation, Sohee was sitting in the meeting hall and felt completely distracted and uncomfortable. She remained disturbed during the entire event and kept thinking that she was enduring this humiliation only for the sake of her daughter. While addressing the audience, she told them that they could use the handouts as a reference and check the details written in them. At the same time, she hoped within herself that she would be able to endure every difficult situation that came before her. Meanwhile, he continued planning more and more ways to tease and disturb her during the meeting. So he then addressed the audience once again and announced that she was wrapping up her presentation. At that moment, she suddenly realized that she had lost control of herself in front of everyone present there. Immediately after that, she collapsed onto the floor. The people who were present became frightened and began asking whether she was all right. They quickly started calling for an ambulance to help her. Do-hoon rushed toward her and helped her stand up. He apologized to everyone and explained that the manager was exhausted from preparing for the presentation. He then declared that the presentation had been concluded and thanked all the people who were present in the room. After that incident, Sohee found herself inside another room with him, where he made her perform cardio training, but that was only her dream. After that, Sohee was awakened by her daughter, Ah-young. Ah-young was sitting beside her and looking at her mother carefully. She told her that she was finally awake. Sohee slowly sat up and asked Ah-young why she was there and what had happened. Ah-young explained that she had come after receiving a call from her mother's workplace. They had informed her that Sohee had fainted. She added that her elder sister had probably been busy working and therefore did not answer the phone, which was why she had come instead. Sohee replied that it was not a serious matter and apologized for making Ah-young worry about her. At that moment, Sohee realized that what she had experienced earlier about doing cardio training with Do-hoon had only been a dream. She thought to herself that even though it was just a dream, she still felt strangely excited by it. Ah-young remained seated beside her and observed her condition closely. She remarked that Sohee looked very pale and asked her if she was feeling all right. Sohee answered that she was fine and then requested Ah-young to leave first. She explained that she still had some work to complete and told her that she could go home alone. Ah-young agreed and advised her mother not to overwork herself anymore. After that, Ah-young left her mother's office. While walking outside, Ah-young kept thinking that her mother did not seem fine at all. She noticed that Sohee had been sweating a lot and felt that perhaps she should have forced her to go home. She wished that sometimes her mother would rely on her as well, instead of always handling everything alone. Suddenly, Do-hoon approached her from behind and said that he wanted to talk about her mother. He assumed that Sohee would be living with her. Then he looked at Ah-young and remarked that they had met again there. Ah Young looked at him carefully and recognized him. She said that he was the same person she had met in Seoul before. After that, both of them stood together and talked. Do-hoon told her everything about her mother's condition. Young then replied that if he was saying her mother was overworking herself, it truly sounded like her. Do-hoon answered that he believed the company expected too much from So-hee, and that as a result, she was becoming overburdened. Young smiled softly and said that the company was one thing, but her mother had always been like that for a very long time. She explained that her mother had a very strong sense of responsibility. She added that So-hee had raised both her and her sister and had given all of her sincerity and devotion to them.